So it's been quite a week. Uh, so I think if you're like me, you have obviously seen the protests that happened this previous week, the riots as well in D.C., the storming of the Capitol, and it's understandably a very scary and uneasy time. And I want to take today to really just kind of talk about this. You know, I chose the Matthew verse for today because it's actually referenced at another point in our history. There's a speech that Abraham Lincoln gave where he actually cited it, and he pulled directly the idea of, a house divided cannot stand. And obviously, this was, around the start of the Civil War. It was around the time when there was, again, a lot of tension in the country. And obviously, that tension escalated to the point where, there was a massive, you know, issue. Well, there was a civil war. But I think its message is still applicable to us today, especially now. You know, if there's anything which I've noticed over this these past years, and really, I'm not saying necessarily even starting in the Trump administration, even before that, is just how we as a nation have really just kind of started to draw battle lines, and it's it's concerning. I think we are headed in a direction that I think we can all agree is not good, and it's definitely not the way that we've been in at least the modern history. I mean, obviously, you know, Civil War, but that was a time where we literally had states seceding. So there has been those points, but I think we've kind of hit a point where, as a nation, we're kind of missing the point. We're kind of like missing this whole idea of having compassion for each other, specifically, and for really trying to understand where other people are coming from, why they are acting in the way that they are. And I'm saying that, and I know that some of you are at home listening to me nodding, and honestly, you really shouldn't be. And that's kind of a problem, at least that I've seen and experienced uh, around me, and even with myself, I would say. I'm not saying that I am higher and mightier in this case, and that I'm not guilty of this as well. But you know, we're at a time where we people seem to believe very, very, very strongly two things: one, that they are right, and two, that by being right, they're in the moral right, and that if you don't share those same views, you're not just wrong, you're a terrible person or an idiot or whatever. And and I'm going to be honest, it hasn't just been the far right or conservatives or Republicans who I've seen doing this. I've seen a lot of friends of mine who are Democrats, who are liberals, who are pretty reasonable human beings, using language and calling people names and insulting people that just is out of character and just not who they are, or really what any of us are supposed to be. This was a country that was founded on the idea that we all sort of have, of all these different freedoms that we could have, and one of them was freedom of belief, and the freedom to be able to voice your opinion. And I think that is something we're starting to just kind of almost get away from, or in the case of voicing your opinion, kind of abusing in a way that really wasn't what it was intended for. There's going to be a lot of talk, I know, about, like, how did we get to this point? What can we do moving forward? And I want to bring up again the whole compassion point. It's interesting, I, in studying history in my younger years, and middlingly, it was years ago. I would not consider myself an expert. I wouldn't even consider myself an amateur historian, but I do remember I did have a very good high school history teacher. Shout out to Mr. Wagner, wherever you are. Um, but one of the things which I do really remember from studying, especially the Civil War, which is was the most divisive time in our history. was that after the war was over, the direction that Lincoln wanted to take to kind of heal the country and bring everybody back together was entirely motivated behind compassion. And it was the idea of, instead of trying to punish the South for everything that happened, let's try and forgive, move on, and help them to rebuild. And unfortunately, he was assassinated before he could even attempt to really carry that out. And as history has shown, it wasn't carried out. We kind of ended up doing the more heavy-handed sort of approach. A little less so. There was some compromises, but in many ways, that sort of approach has led to a lot of problems that we still have in our country today. And you could maybe even say that some of the divisions we see now came from back then. And as a Christian, as an American citizen, I am genuinely very concerned that we're going to make the same mistake. Because here's the reality: I know everything we saw this past week was disturbing. It was disturbing when we were seeing stuff in the summer as well. With riots that were going on for a cause that I believe many of you out there, like me, believe was very, very, very just and very needed. But I'm concerned that we're not gonna, if we ignore where this all kind of came from and where these individuals are coming from, which is this feeling that their voice isn't necessarily being heard and that they're not being supported, and that the American society as a whole and government especially doesn't really care about them and doesn't really care about their needs. Um, you know, I just have a fear that we're going to ignore that and move on to a sort of a rhetoric of let's punish those who were in leadership responsible for this, and miss the fact that we're in doing so martyring those individuals and further hurting and causing these people to feel that way. So it seems like, I know with what I just said, it does seem like that's something that is out of all of our hands. I mean, after all, I'm not in government. I'm sure many of you are not, if any of you are. But there is stuff that we can do. If the general public, if we just treat each other differently, eventually things will change for the better in that way. If we don't attack people who have different viewpoints of ours, even if they themselves are attacking us, if we really are willing to turn the other cheek and not sit down and assume that the best route is to respond with, essentially the same sort of rhetoric, I think we'll find that these types of things don't escalate to that point anymore. And look, I'm not expecting us as a nation and as a people to be perfect at this. We probably won't. I mean, history shows we definitely won't. But we can definitely do way better. And I think this is just sorely needed at this time. So that's all I have for this week. We do have one more song, so I'd like to invite you all at home to join me in that. And stay safe, and I will see you next week.